gunning for trouble. 007. It spells Bond.
By 1964, James Bond had taken the world by storm. Even though the character had been introduced many years prior in novels, the films breathed new life into the franchise. Bond's license to kill, combined with a charming personality, exotic locales throughout the world, and breathtaking action set pieces, gave audiences some of the greatest thrills ever displayed on the silver screen to that point. The popularity of the films would also come to influence those of the original novels they were based on, as they saw an increase in both sales and ideas for series author Ian Fleming to write about. Unfortunately, Fleming's work as an author would be cut short when he died of a heart attack at the age of 56. Despite the passing of Bond's creator, producers Albert R. Broccoli and Harry Saltzman, and first-time Bond director Guy Hamilton, were determined to continue the ongoing box office success of the film franchise. And it's this determination that led to what is regarded as the most famous of Connery's Bond films, Goldfinger.
James Bond, mixing business with girls and thrills. Girls and fun. Girls and danger.
If Dr. No is what laid the foundation of the Bond formula, and From Russia with Love is what built the overall structure, then Goldfinger is the film that polishes the formula to a mirror sheen, so much so that it even won an Academy Award for its efforts. The film was so hyped prior to its release that even the filmmakers couldn't resist including a reference to it in the end credits of From Russia with Love. It's really hard to put into words just how much of an impact this film had on audiences. Not only was it one of the first true big blockbusters of its kind, but its popularity upon release also made way for lots of advertising. Seriously, there were tons of ads and merchandise based on this film. At the time, it must have been the 1960s equivalent to Star Wars when it had released back in 1977 and became a whole new pop culture phenomenon in its own right. The fact that a film like this was made nearly 60 years ago is simply mind-boggling because it's as enjoyable today to watch as it was back then. The film begins much in the same way as From Russia with Love did, with a pre-title sequence, though this event has less to do with the story and is more of a warm-up than anything else. It shows Bond sneaking about at night, planting C4 explosives in a drug laboratory, before escaping to a bar in true fashion and detonating the charges inside, before brawling his way through a fist fight for good measure. It pulls all the stops and gets you really excited for the rest of the film. The action, the girl, and of course the one-liners are all there in full swing.
Shocking. Positively shocking.
After this, it opens with one of the most famous Bond anthems in the entire franchise, Goldfinger by Shirley Bassey. Her performance of this theme was so iconic that she would go on to perform 2 more Bond film themes, Diamonds Are Forever and Moonraker. This recognition would also make her theme the template for future themes to follow in terms of tone and style, even though technically the song itself is about the villain. Of course, Bassey's singing alone is worthy of recognition. Reportedly, she nearly fainted in the studio while holding onto the last note at the end of the song, which I think is a true testament to her commitment and talent to the act. But Bassey is only the tip of the iceberg. The evil nature of the lyrics, the blaring brass instruments, and the ominous pounding of drums in the background, everything just has a real sinister edge to it, and it perfectly complements the world which Bond inhabits. Or, at least, that's what I think. Producer Harry Saltzman, on the other hand, upon hearing the finished theme, was quoted as saying, "That's the worst f***ing song I've ever heard in my f***ing life." Well, we'll agree to disagree on that. Hats off to you, John Barry. Well done. Now, let's talk about the film itself. It starts at a public pool with Felix Leiter, played by Czech Linder. This makes him the second actor to play the character after Jack Lord from Dr. No, who was cut from this film due to asking for a high pay raise and top star billing. Felix eventually finds Bond being looked after by a woman named Dink. Yes, seriously, her name is Dink.
Dink, meet Felix Leiter.
Hello.
Felix, say hello to Dink.
Hi, Dink.
Dink, say goodbye to Felix. Man talk.
What kind of sadistic parent names their child Dink? Anyway, Felix tells Bond that MI6 wants him to investigate the activities of a man named R.I.P. Goldfinger, who's played by Gert Frobe, who just so happens to be the main villain of the film. Leiter believes that Goldfinger is cheating at a game of rummy, so Bond manages to find out where his hotel room is and enters to find one of the Bond girls of the film, Jill Masterson, played by Shirley Eaton. Of course, Bond is able to foil Goldfinger's plan at being richer than he already is by blackmailing him over the radio while seducing Jill at the same time. This sets the rest of the film's events in motion, as well as giving us a brief insight into Bond's personal music tastes.
My dear girl, there are some things that just aren't done. Such as drinking Dom Perignon 53 above a temperature of 38 degrees Fahrenheit. That's as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs.
The rest of the film involves investigating the grander scheme that Goldfinger has. He's suspected of smuggling and selling gold across the world to illegally increase his wealth, so Bond is ordered to find out more by playing a game of golf at Goldfinger's country club with a Nazi gold bar at stake. This is where we really get to see and understand the Goldfinger character in terms of personality.
Mr. Bond?
Yes?
This is Mr. Goldfinger. How do you do?
How do you do?
That pause alone says more about Goldfinger than any line of dialogue could in that moment. He's portrayed as a man that really doesn't like to lose, especially to someone that he sees as lesser than him. He appears sophisticated and charismatic at first glance, but as the film progresses you can really see how ruthless and sadistic he can be. His evil plan, literally called Operation Grand Slam, is to irradiate the United States gold supply in order to raise the value of his own bullion exponentially, while killing tens of thousands in the process. In most of his scenes, he is in complete control of the situation and has a penchant for perfectionism, no doubt due to his obsession with gold. This is a guy that doesn't mess around. He looks larger than life, but acts methodically. He hates losing, but he loves to taunt others when the opportunity arises. His crazy switch flips back and forth many times, and it's a real joy to watch, especially when he's more subdued. One of my favorite scenes in the film is when Goldfinger invites Bond for a drink just before he carries out his plan. Aside from how brilliantly casual he treats the situation, he gives Bond a chance to figure out what his evil plan is, putting the pieces together without saying anything until the light bulb in Bond's head finally goes off. As a side note, this also provides one of the funniest they did the math situations you'll ever see in film.
$15 billion in gold bullion weighs 10,500 tons. 60 men would take 12 days to load it onto 200 trucks. Now, at the most, you're going to have 2 hours before the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines move in and make you put it back.
Wrap your head around that. Overall, Gert Frobe does an amazing job as Goldfinger, especially considering he didn't even speak English when filming. He had to read his lines from the script phonetically, with his thick German accent being dubbed by actor Michael Collins in the finished film. Despite this, his presence on screen alone makes the character work, and you can even hear Gert's voice in one scene toward the climax of the film. Goldfinger is the first and only villain in all of Connery's Bond films to not be associated with Spectre, and it's this unique trait that makes him stand out from the other villains. It's very much a different kind of villainy, where the result isn't world domination so much as it's trying to make an extra buck by any means necessary, even if it means killing people in the process. He's selfish, narcissistic, and even times ridiculous, but that's what makes Goldfinger stand out from the rest.
Operation Grand Slam will be successful.
You will be there to see for yourself. Too closely for comfort, I'm afraid.
He's not alone though. Accompanying him at almost all times is his Korean bodyguard and manservant Oddjob, played by Hawaiian pro wrestler and Olympic silver medalist Harold Sakata. He's the total opposite of Goldfinger in terms of personality, basically being the yin to his yang. Whereas Goldfinger makes a speech every chance he gets, Oddjob doesn't say a word, instead only making occasional gestures and grunts.
Ah, ah! Ah! Ah!
Instead of dressing fancy and flamboyant, he's more low-key and professional, though not without his fair share of gimmicks, of course. His interactions with Bond are pretty funny too. He always smiles at him when they meet, which always seems to unnerve Bond a little bit more than Goldfinger's dialogues. Oddjob is the perfect complement to Goldfinger. Of course, he's one of the most iconic villains in the franchise, so much so that Harold would appear in several Vicks cough medicine commercials, which are still pretty fun to watch even today. He doesn't have much to say or do, but it's great to see him even when he's only in the background. That silhouette on the wall? Come on, how can anyone forget that? Finally, there's Avengers actress Honor Blackman, playing the lead Bond girl of the film, Pussy Galore. Probably one of the most absurd names ever for a female character.
Who are you?
My name is Pussy Galore.
I must be dreaming.
Yeah, it's stupid, but at least it's memorable, and it makes sense in a weird, Bondish sort of way. It's definitely better than Dink. She works as Goldfinger's personal pilot, as well as the leader of an all-female flying circus, which Goldfinger plans to use to help carry out Operation Grand Slam. She's definitely a lot spunkier than the previous Bond girls, and more resistant to his charms than others before her. This is probably due to the fact that she doesn't start out as an accomplice to Bond, but rather as an enemy, so the differences in allegiance make for an interesting contrast. Not only is she plucky in nature, but she's also skilled in the art of judo, which she uses against Bond on more than one occasion. Just from looking at her on screen, you can tell Honor had a lot of fun with this role, and that fun transcends to the audience. She took delight in embarrassing interviewers by repeatedly saying her character's name in response to questions, and she even showed up to the film's official premiere wearing an actual golden finger. She doesn't really add much to the story, but her entertainment value and enthusiasm more than makes up for it.
Manners, Oddjob. I thought you always took your hat off to a lady. You know, he kills little girls like you.
Little boys, too.
Now let's talk about the good things in this film, because I got a lot to say. There's so many individual standout scenes in this film that fans and critics still talk about, it's enough to make your head spin. There's the scene where Jill is painted head to toe in gold, the brawl between Bond and Oddjob at Fort Knox, and of course, the laser scene. At the time, this must have been the most nail-biting, suspenseful sequence ever committed to film. Like in From Russia with Love, Bond has been bested by the villain and is forced into a tight spot, risking being burned in half by a gold-cutting laser, except this time, Bond has no gadgets to back him up. Just him, his wits, and one of the greatest dialogue exchanges between hero and villain.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
Everything in this scene is perfect. The sound of the laser as it draws closer, the sweat on Bond's brow as he's seconds away from death, the subtly rising crescendo of John Barry's soundtrack, all topped off by a villain acting like it's just another day on the job. While I still prefer the train scene in From Russia with Love, just in terms of its raw, realistic presentation, this scene is definitely a close second in terms of my favorites with Connery.
Words you may have overheard, which cannot possibly have any significance to you or anyone in your organization.
Can you afford to take that chance?
While there are other serious moments like this in the film, some of the other enjoyable moments also happen to be some of the funnier ones. The golf course scene is a prime example. Bond is just 2 holes away from finishing a game of golf between him and Goldfinger, and he has to figure out how he's going to beat him. I love casual scenes like this between hero and villain because it puts them on equal playing fields and gives the audience a chance to delve into their personalities before the action begins. Not to mention, the dialogue between the two is fantastic. Goldfinger eventually loses his ball into the rough, and Bond plays a trick to replacing his golf ball to win the game. Of course, Goldfinger's reaction to losing the game is priceless, and the caddy's comments always make me crack up.
Passenger number 1. Good.
If that's his original ball, I'm Arnold Palmer.
There's also the scene on the plane where Bond tries to avoid being snooped on in the bathroom. It's like a skit from a silent comedy. Of course, I gotta mention the gadgets. From Russia with Love dabbled with gadgets to a certain extent, but in Goldfinger, they're here in full force. See, Bond doesn't just get a small little gadget, oh no, he gets an entire car. The legendary Aston Martin DB5, a car so popular it's appeared in 8 films to date, including the upcoming No Time to Die. Naturally, this car was the subject of much advertising, even getting its own documentary, which I highly recommend you watch, if only to witness a curious piece of history. It's loaded with all kinds of gizmos, which makes the car chase entertaining as hell. Q is another highlight of the film for me. This film features the first time we really get to see the inner workings of his mad science, as well as the first time he's referred to as Q, dropping the name Boothroyd altogether. It's great to finally see the two butting heads with each other, like a dispute between student and master. Bond irritates Q without even trying.
Eject a seat, you're joking.
I never joke about my work, 007.
As with other Bond films, Goldfinger isn't without its flaws. There's a scene where Bond is being playful with Pussy Galore and she's having none of it. At first it seems innocent and lighthearted until Bond pins her down and slowly forces himself onto her. I understand the Bond girl has to fall in love with Bond at some point, but the way it happens just feels rushed and inorganic, not to mention creepy by today's standards. To make things even more uncomfortable, in the original Fleming novel, Pussy Galore confesses to Bond that she became a lesbian when she was sexually assaulted by her uncle at the age of 12. Even though this fact is left out of the film, seeing this scene after knowing what happens in the novel makes me wonder what the filmmakers were thinking with this approach. The idea of converting a woman's sexuality in just one unwarranted kiss is pretty poor taste, and that's putting it lightly. The scene where Goldfinger prepares to invade Fort Knox is also strange. Pussy Galore's flying circus is used to deploy a nerve gas across the base so there are no forces left to combat Goldfinger's troop when they arrive. Now, I like the idea of Goldfinger invading a top-secret facility like this, and changing the plot point in the novel from stealing gold to nuking it was a wise choice. But the actual invasion itself leaves me scratching my head. First, there's no way Goldfinger could guarantee his gas would reach every single soldier present on the grounds. It completely ignores anyone who's inside a building. Hell, even if they weren't inside, how could he guarantee the gas would be distributed so effectively to ground level that every soldier would be affected? Second, the gas ends up being switched at the last minute, I guess because Bond was able to persuade her. That part I get, but it's never shown. It happens out of nowhere, and it's really confusing to see people start getting up on their feet without any context. Aside from some hiccups in the story though, there isn't really that much to complain about. Although it's not the first Bond film, it's the first of the bombastic blockbusters in the series that we would come to know, so it's natural that there would be some mistakes along the way. The subtleties and nuances of the previous 2 films now take a backseat to greater action spectacles and more outlandish characters. This is where the series started to change direction and became a bit campier in presentation. That doesn't mean it's all camp though. There's a good revenge story halfway through the film where Jill's sister Tilly tries to avenge her sister's death, only to end up tragically killed by her sister's own killer, Oddjob. There's also some classic dry British humor thrown in. In one scene, Bond is being debriefed before he goes to Goldfinger's country club, and he's so bored he'd rather critique the brandy he's drinking.
What's the matter with it?
I'd say it was a 30-year-old fiend indifferently blended, sir. With an overdose of Bombois.
Colonel Smithers is giving the lecture, 007.
That alone is hilarious, but watch M's reaction as the conversation continues.
Because the price of gold varies from country to country. If you buy it here at $30 an ounce, you can sell it in, say, Pakistan at $110 and triple your money.
That is priceless. You can't really go wrong with this film. There's a reason why it's still talked about as much as it is today, 6 decades after it was released. The larger-than-life characters, sets, soundtrack, and set pieces are all there as they were before, but they're bigger and better than they've ever been. Goldfinger is regarded as the greatest of Connery's Bond films, and while I still prefer From Russia with Love, I can definitely see where people are coming from. If you want to see the 1960s equivalent of a Marvel superhero movie, I really recommend you check this film out. As far as classic blockbusters go, you can't find a more fitting gold standard. This concludes my review of Goldfinger. Thank you for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for the next one.
Go!